Okay, good afternoon, and from London. This is the start of the 2021 UK Aviation Fuels Committee meeting. Sadly, yet another virtual meeting, but hopefully maybe the last. Maybe next time we'll all be in person. Let's hope so. But similar sort of layout to last time. Thank you very much for everybody for joining and joining in with the whole meeting. I think we've got a good program, some interesting talks covering both the specification itself and some of the related issues, but also the larger industry and the challenges that are facing the larger industry in terms of sustainable fuels and the rest of it. So a really great 2 days, and it's over 2 days this time because we wanted to give a little bit more time. We were conscious of the meeting in October being a little bit tight on discussion time, which is all important. So this time we've got a bit more space. So I very much encourage conversation and questions. Now, in terms of asking questions, you can do so ideally at the end of any presentation, but during the presentation, if you want to ask a question, you please use an icon called raising your hand. You'll see a little smiley face with a hand held up at the side of your face. If you click that, then Francesca will see you, and she will, at the end of the presentation, when questions, she will unmute your microphone and tell you that you can ask the question. So that's how the questions will work. And please do so at any time during the presentation, so you sort of get into the queue. She'll probably run a queuing system, and first come, first served. So we'll work it like that. In terms of the general meeting arrangements, we're going to have a break in the middle, all being well, as you can see from the agenda, and we'll finish by 5, and then tomorrow we'll do the same thing. So that should work well. We're going to kick off. I think just two other things while I think of it is that if you're in the audience, please can you have your microphones muted and your cameras off. That's and that's that. I think Francesca can mute your microphones herself, but she can't switch your cameras on and off. So you have to make sure your camera's off. On the other side, for presenters, just to remind presenters that when you start your presentation, please switch your camera on, and obviously your microphone on. And when you finish, you can you switch it off. That would be the arrangement. Well, we're going to kick off with two presentations from the MoD itself, and importantly, the first presentation will be from Group Captain Jamie Miller, and Jamie is the man in charge of the whole shebang of aviation, well, fuels generally, in the MoD, and he can't actually present visually because of the MoD restrictions on use of cameras at the moment, but he will now talk to us from his perspective and his views on the specification. So really good to hear Jamie. He's actually been around in this world quite a bit, so it's great to have him back. And over to you, Jamie.
Mike, thank you. Thanks very much. And hello from the Ministry of Defence, as it were, because that's where I am sat at the moment, in a very overcast London. And it's odd to see, as I look out of the window, the London Eye stationary, which is, say, very unusual. I'm going to start with a thanks, actually, and the thanks really to Mike, who's about to chair this for the next couple of days, and obviously Francesca and Katie, and obviously Tina for pulling all the content together and the speakers. And thank you in advance again to all the speakers who will be presenting over the next few days. Unfortunately, due to other things happening in the Ministry of Defence, probably many of you know that the Prime Minister will be stood up this afternoon in Parliament announcing the integrated review findings. I've been brought into London to some other bits and pieces, so I'm unfortunately not going to be able to listen to much of the next 2 days. But it's an interesting time, and I think from a defence perspective and wider perspective for industry, a very interesting time. From the government, we've got the NZ50. The defence is about to issue its defence, climate change and sustainability strategy approach. That will be out towards the end of this month, very early next month, of how defence is going to go after these things. Going back to the government, the switch to electric cars in 2030, the move from coal and gas power stations to nuclear and sustainable. There is lots going on. And I think what the key thing for defence will be is, and it's a term you will start to hear more, is be the fast follower. Some of these technologies, as you know, are very cutting edge, new, others are proven. But we will generally be looking to follow the key industry moves in the way that we go. In other things, as I say, fast follower, also leading in some areas, and I know Tina's about to present on the change of specification for the DSFA. You know, and as moving towards and getting all our platforms, some of them, as you know, were pretty old platforms, right through to the newer F-35s. To get those moved all to agree to be able to, or signed off to take up to 50% SAF was a great piece of work for Tina and the team, and it took, as I say, a while to get there. But looking forward, we've got to be much quicker at being able to test and adjust to how the market moves. And interestingly, you'll have heard, I'm sure many of you and some on this call will probably be on some of these subcommittees, the Jet Zero Council set up by the government. For ourselves on the actual council itself, Chief of the Air Staff will be representing the military, but DSFA, myself and Tina and a few others represent on all those subcommittees. Which again is trying to push that and open up the markets and invest. And I say I'm sure there's more of that over the coming days. So I think just to sum up, it's interesting times. There's a lot going on, and sometimes it feels there's so much going on, especially across our international partners as well in the military and on the civil sides, that it sometimes feels quite hard to get our fingers around, you know, what is out there. And this sort of forum is exactly what we need to be able to understand what's going on and really keep many fingers in many pies. So again, it allows, especially as the military, to be that fast follower of the technology that industry decides to take up, you know, more on the commercial side. So I've seen the program. It's a fascinating program. Over 100 people in this conference over the next couple of days. So I hope you get a lot out of it and give a lot to it. So on behalf of the Ministry of Defence, welcome again. And I'm going to now, I think, hand over, if not to Mike, to Tina.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jamie. Really, really good, and good luck with all the admin and strategic review stuff. Wish you luck with that. Thank you very much, and we'll move straight on to Tina Gleaves, who's going to obviously give us an update of what's actually happening to the spec, and in particular some comments about the upcoming issue 13. So over to you, Tina. Off you go.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. I'm Tina Gleaves. I'm the Aviation Technical Manager within the Defence Strategic Fuels Authority. And today I'll be providing you with an update on DSFA 9191. I'll first provide you with the current issue, that's issue 12, and the changes that were implemented for those, and that's basically for those of you that weren't able to dial in last October. I'll then move on to draft issue 13, which is detailing the changes that have been incorporated. before moving on to future draft issue 14. On this slide, we have some nice photographs. And going left to right, looking at the screen, we have the F-35 Lightning on board Royal Fleet Auxiliary Argus. The red arrows in the center needs no introduction with their famous red, white, and blue smoke trails. And then finally, the Apache helicopter. Next slide, please, Francesca. So, MoD's aims for DEFSTAN 9191. I put this slide up last year and I put it up again as it remains a continuous aim for alignment with ASTM D1655. So in effect, we will ensure continuation of harmonization effort, and effort remains in maintaining the specification in the interests of both MoD and commercial with a fit for purpose specification. Next slide, please, Francesca. So this slide provides you with the current status of DEFSTAN 9191 issue 12 and the web address for access to all defense standards that you might wish to access. So 9191 issue 12 was published 18th of September 2020 and implemented 18th of December 2020. There's always a 3-month implementation period to allow the market to get up together. The standards can be accessed via the Defence Gateway, and I've provided the link on the slide there. Or if you have any issues with gaining access, you can email myself or Katie, and we would happily provide you with a copy. Next slide, please, Francesca. So 9191 issue 12 amendments included, and I think the most significant change was the PAM platform MoD-wide clearance of alternative fuel blends in accordance with ASTM D7566. Excuse me. As a consequence, we removed the note in Annex B1, which under contract prohibited the supply of such fuels to MoD. We have also ensured that the let of the new Global Bulk Fuel Supply Contract was amended to allow these alternative fuel blends in accordance with 9191 and D7566. The contract was awarded November 2020 and now opens up the potential to supply these alternative fuel blends to MoD and helps to incentivize the UK market to produce these alternative fuel blending components. Next slide, please, Francesca. We also included particle counting limits. These were added for cumulative channel counts and added as an alternative method to gravimetric IP423 ASTM D5452. And the intent is to make particle counting the referee method in 2025. Next slide, please, Francesca. Right, Table 1, Note 5, the ASTM D1319 die issue note, that was clarified to state that batch numbers greater than 960-983 are suitable for use and yields comparable results to batches prior to 975. Next slide, please, Francesca. There were minor amendments just to clarify requirements. So Annex A 2.6, antioxidant reporting requirements were clarified. Annex B 4.1, co-processing, there was a minor rewording to align with ASTM D1655. Annex C 4.1, the FAME carryover statement, again, just minor rewording, nothing significant. Next slide, please, Francesca. So ASTM D56 Flashpoint, there was a joint study between the Energy Institute and ASTM looking at the historic bias associated with this flashpoint method. The amendments that we've put in can be found in Annex E, Table 5. So we've essentially removed the bias note and inserted a new note based on the study precision statement. This study is ILS 2019_MMS_1. Next slide, please, Francesca. So sable color. So Annex F 4.2 is just a change for changes in sable color to read reduction in color in both the test and the chart in the section. This concludes issue 12 amendments. I'll now move on to draft issue 13 proposals. Next slide, please, Francesca. Right, so draft 13 status. It's been submitted to AFC Exco and the wider FC for comment. So Ministry of Defence, delivery teams and original equipment manufacturers and public comment periods will commence April 2021 and response requested by July 2021. Next slide, please, Francesca. So the proposals include refinery components, Table 1, 2.6 and Note 8. We have removed the requirement to report mildly hydroprocessed component and reworded Note 8. This decision was based on the fact that mildly hydroprocessed is not required for any other test or any other purpose in the specification. For example, lubricity has to be carried out for fuels containing less than 5% non-hydroprocessed components and at least 20% severely hydroprocessed components. So it's just a decision to take out that as an extra reporting requirement. The doctor test, Table 1, Note 7. It was raised to us that the note detailing this requirement was confusing. So we've looked at it, amended the reporting requirements to state that the doctor test may be carried out as a single test, provided the result is negative. If a positive result is obtained, then the captain quantification must be carried out. Alternatively, McCaptain testing can be done in isolation, and I hope this is clear, but if you think it could be reworded better, then please let us know. I see we've gone on to the next slide. Hang on a minute, I was waffling. Right. Lubricity improving additive, Annex A, A5.4. So Tollard, so we've removed Tollard 351 due to obsolescence. This item is no longer supported by the manufacturer. Can you go to the next slide, please, Francesca? The co-processing data source, Annex B, B4.3.4 has been reworded essentially to align with ASTM. The estimated distillation data in Annex E, Note 2, calculation of IP 123, has been reworded to provide a more detailed direction in what's required. In addition to these, there's just been some minor formatting and editorial amendments. Next slide, please, Francesca. So that completes issue 13 draft. So if we're looking ahead to draft issue 14, work is intended to commence on draft issue 14 start of October 2021. So if you have any comments or suggestions, please forward them to myself and Katie. We're happy to take them forward to EXCO. Next slide, please, Francesca. It's very early days for draft issue 14, but it doesn't do any harm to think about any changes we would like to see for the next issue. So what we have on the books that have been carried forward is conductivity. Can this safely be reduced down to 25 PSM? There is currently some work going on with some of the OEMs looking at conductivity. So this topic will be addressed following the outcome of the external work. Should there be a referee method for thermal stability? Question mark. Water separation test methods, i.e. ASTM 7224 MCell and ASTM D8073 WSI should be considered for inclusion. And finally, Aquarius interplane water management additive. That was approved in ASTM last year. It works by encapsulating water present in the fuel by forming a molecular cage or a micelle around the water molecules and is removed from the aircraft fuel tank by the combustion process. Next slide, please, Francesca. That concludes the draft issue 14, future issue. The next AFC conference, hopefully, fingers crossed, we can have a face-to-face meeting next spring. The vaccination programs are rolling out and seem to be having a very positive effect on COVID statistics. So fingers crossed, we can do this. If that's the case, it'll be 15th to the 16th of March 2022. The venue will be London, to be confirmed. And details and registration will be published by the Energy Institute and DSTAN. Next slide, please, Francesca. Right, all the images I've used in this presentation are from the Defence Image website, and they're from public sector information licensed under the Open Government License version 3.0. And this image shows the air-to-air refueling with Typhoon. And I have been lucky enough to have witnessed this in person quite a few years ago now, but certainly a memorable sight and an experience to remember. Next slide, please, Francesca. Well, just before I take any questions, this image shows the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and this photo shows a Lancaster accompanied by Hurricanes and Spitfires. The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight mission is to maintain the priceless artifacts of our national heritage in an airworthy condition in order to commemorate those who have fallen in service to this country, to promote the modern day Air Force and to inspire future generations. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Excellent update on where we are. It's amazing how much work goes on in terms of just keeping not only the spec current, but in addressing all the issues of the day, and how very minor things require a lot of work, because it's always the law of unforeseen consequences. When you're trying to change something, you've really got to think about the implications for every bit of equipment and all that sort of stuff. So let's move on to questions. I see we've got a question from, firstly, from Joanna Baldry. Perhaps Francesca, you could unmute Joanna, and Joanna, ask away. A good test of whether this is going to work.
So if Joanna, if the attendees who want to ask questions can unmute themselves.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry, Joanna. That's it's over. Up to you. Sorry. Are you there still? Is another question. If you're not, then rather than wait, let's ask us another question from Kevin. Kevin Bauer, would you like to ask your question, and then we'll come back to Joanna?
Oh yeah, thanks, Mike. It's Kevin Bauer from BP. Tina, just a quick update. Yeah, could you give us some update on what's happening to the other specifications? You know, in terms of their updates, in terms of F-34, and what's happening within sort of moving the changes into, you know, into NATO and redefining the minimum requirements for the F-34 specification.
Yeah, certainly. F-34 DEFSTAN 9187 is under platform review at the moment, MoD platform review at the moment. It's due to finish, I believe it's beginning of May. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but we've not had any issues or comments raised shortly. It's all looking pretty good, so that should be updated sort of towards the end of the summer. With respect to NATO, unfortunately there has not been any NATO meeting since COVID broke, but we're gearing up to have the next meeting, probably virtual, in June. So I'm hoping to take forward NATO work then.
So that we're bringing all the changes that have been made to DEFSTAN into the discussions about what the minimum requirements would be for any NATO fuel, in terms of SAF, antioxidants, and things like that. Yeah,
well, it has to be voted on, so it has to be a majority vote. So I will take things forward, and we'll see how it pans out. I don't see a big issue because the US, Canada, that they are using SAF blends. I'm trying to think. I'm sure there is a mention of SAF in there somewhere, but it's very brief. But yeah, it does need to be updated, Kevin.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, then. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Let's just go back to Joanna. Joanna Baldry, are you there? And can you ask the question by unmuting your mic? No? Okay. In that case, Richard Cooling, you have a question. So if you could unmute and ask your question, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Tina. That was very informative. I just wondered if there was any thoughts regarding the rating of JEFTOT tubes. Obviously, a lot of recertification labs use traditional visual tube raters still. Obviously, the new technology is there. I just wondered if there was any kind of thoughts as to whether the new tube rating technology was likely to sort of come into the spec rather than I know it's in the spec. I meant as the mandatory part rather than the optional part.
That's certainly the intent, but we have to allow industry to catch up. I think there will be a period of time where it's either or. I certainly know in our contracted laboratory, they initially do a visual tube rating, but they do follow it up with an ETR or an ITR.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Just, sorry, Richard, I'll just point out to further questioners, if you could just mention who you represent before you ask the question, that would be helpful for everybody on the line. We've got another question from a very famous name here, Roberto Rodrigo. If it's a Roberto Rodrigo, I know. Over to you, Roberto.
Hello everyone. Thanks, Tina, for the presentation. It was very informative. Can you hear me well, right?
Yeah, I can.
So my question is regarding the particle counting. Reading the text, the word that you have touched, in note 3 of table 1, it says that in case of extending the limits, Annex B or AP 565 or IP 567 should be applied, okay? But in note 1 of table 5 in Annex 8 says that in that cases, Annex X2 of ASTM D7619 should be applied. So my question is, which one, which note is the right one?
Yes.
I think if you can email me with your response, with your question, then we can respond. We can look at the specification and look at it in detail.
Yeah, that's probably a bit of a detailed question for on the spot, unless there's somebody who really is right on that. I see there's I think Kevin has another question, and sometimes Kevin, you're pretty sharp on that, but. Do you want to ask your question, Kevin? No?
It's just a response to Richard. Yeah, in the ASTM cross-check interlaboratory scheme, there's currently about maybe 40 labs that do report the deposit thickness as part of that. You know, there's still a large number of laboratories that still have only the visual tube rating. So I think in terms of making, you know, the metrology method, the mandatory, just mandatory, and removing the visual tube rater, he's a long way off. It's you know, so, but you know, it's obviously the way forward. I mean, we've done work on removing some of the older models of thermal stability models from the method, but yeah, in terms of the rating at the moment, I think we've still got to keep the visual tube rating in there, but yeah, you know, continue to push the metrology methods, you know, forward. On the particle counting, I think we're rewording, aren't we? One of the things we're doing is rewording the notes 1 and the notes in table 1 and in the alternative test method to make it clear exactly what is required in terms of what is to be reported. Basically, you know, there's only requirement to do one test at the point of manufacture, either particle count or particulate matter, and that should be reported. How people manage that if they have any issues is down to them. But it's essentially it's you only report one result on the test on the test certificate. We'll have a look at that. I'll have a look at those notes that we've done again, because that was something I worked on. As you know, as you say, just try to update it to make sure it was more clear for in issue 13. So I'll have a look at that again, as part of the public comment. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Kevin. But Roberto, if you drop an email to probably to Kevin realistically, or Tina, and with your detailed question, they'll get to you. I think that's the best bet. Okay. I just before we move on, I just wonder whether Joanna, did you actually have a question in the end, or is your struggling to unmute your microphone? But here's your last chance, I'm afraid. We'll be moving on to the next presentation.
Hi, Mike. Joanna's having trouble unmuting, but her question is, where is draft issue 13 being posted?
All right. Okay, that's one that Tina can answer, I'm sure.
Yeah. It was sent out the end of last week to all AFC members, but it will be posted on the DSTM website as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Tina. That's great. Seeing no other questions in the system, it's we're pretty well smack on time, so that's excellent. We're going to move on now to one of the other major specs within the MoD portfolio, the one which in a way tends to look like the poor relation sometimes, because it's a very small market and small volumes and all that, but still very important, particularly for pilot training and all the rest of it. And what with the lead issues, a lot going on in many ways about how we what the future for avgas is. So who better to talk about it than Alisdair Clark from BP. So Alisdair, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Alisdair Clark from BP. I'm going to say a few words on behalf of the industry covering Defence Standard 91090. This Defence Standard relates to aviation gasoline as used in piston engine aircraft, so particularly pertinent to the last slide you saw. This specification is used throughout the world in general aviation for such aircraft and remains a primary reference document for industry manufacture and delivery of such product. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Today we're going to look at 3 items on the agenda. Firstly, we're going to look at Defence Standard 91090 Issue 5. Then we're going to visit a National Academy of Sciences report looking at leaded avgas. And finally, we're going to say a few words about 100 very low lead, another aviation gasoline specification. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is Defence Standard 91090 Issue 5. It remains current. It was published originally in December 2019. Within the specification, 3 grades are listed. There's a mid-octane unleaded avgas grade, UL91, and then we have 2 high-octane leaded avgas grades, 100LL and grade 100. Copies of the standard are available from the MoD website, so the DSTM website there. Do use that link to access any of these documents. They're public domain and very useful. Thank you. Let's move to the next slide, please. We'll now talk a little bit about the National Academies of Science report. This study was at the request of Congress in the USA. Essentially, the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine were asked to investigate the environmental impact of leaded avgas in the US. Now, the US is the largest avgas market in the world, so this investigation is very important for the industry as it gives an insight to all areas which use aviation gasoline. One of the aspects which was key to the study was to look at routes to transition to an unleaded avgas, because currently the high octane grades use the octane enhancement additive tetraethyl lead. And octane for an avgas engine, as you probably know, is very important. It controls the combustion within the engine's piston engine chamber to ensure it doesn't detonate. Detonation can severely damage the engine and cause catastrophic failure. So octane quality, a critical aspect, and the use of this lead additive in the high octane grades. Anyway, the study has been completed now by the National Academy of Sciences, and the results were presented on the 2nd of February this year to the industry. If you are interested in the study and involved in piston engine flight, I'd recommend downloading a copy of the full document, and there's a link there where you can access the full report. If we could move to the next slide, please. On this slide, I've sought to provide a summary of the findings of that document. Essentially, these aspects were put forward as a way to move the industry forward regarding reducing exposure of lead in avgas and also transitioning to an unleaded market in the future. Taking each item in turn, one of the early observations was that avgas tankage should make it clear that the fuel does contain tetraethyl lead as part of the package for avgas, rather than just a label saying flammable or the grade avgas 100LL, for instance. So some emphasis there on signage. Also, the study noted that airport ground operations could be important at minimising exposure of the general public to lead from aircraft exhaust emissions. Typically, an aircraft must run up its engine to full power to make sure it's all operating properly. Where that takes place on the airfield could be important, and a particular airfield was highlighted where the run-up area was close to a public thoroughfare, and ideally the run-up area should be well away from public thoroughfares to minimise any kind of lead exposure from exhaust emissions. The industry would also like to promote another lower lead avgas grade, and this is listed under ASTM D910 as 100 very low lead. 100 VLL has a reduction in the maximum lead content for aviation gasoline from 0.56 to 0.5 grams of lead per litre. So that's a 20% reduction, and potentially rollout of 100 VLL over grade 100 LL could cause a reduction in lead emissions to the atmosphere, which would benefit the industry. They are also keen to promote the Piston Aviation Fuels Initiative. This is a large program run by the industry and FAA in the US. The aspiration of all parties is to develop a high octane replacement for 100 LL, an unleaded fuel to move forward into the future with. A very challenging program technically, but that is progressing within the US FAA's Technical Centre with industry input as well. So thanks to all those taking part in that program. Another area which could be promoted more directly is to use mid-octane unleaded avgas grades in aircraft which are compatible with such fuels. An example being unleaded 94 grade in the US or unleaded 91 in Europe. They also stated within this report that we should begin to set a clear goal when the market should have aircraft which are fully compatible with unleaded fuels. So look to the future for aircraft being manufactured today. Make sure the engines included in those airframes is compatible with at least one ASTM approved unleaded grade, or if you look in terms of defence standards, that defence standard unleaded 91 grade. There was proposals also to seek new technologies. We're seeing changes in the general aviation market with innovation regarding electrical aircraft, for instance, and diesel engine aircraft, compression ignition, and some small turbines. Each of these aircraft types has various benefits and challenges, but possible ways to surmount the challenge of getting to an unleaded avgas in the future. And a final aspect of the report was also to continue to promote further environmental and health research to make sure we understand this problem and we take the right course of action to get a good solution for general aviation to move into the future. If we could move to the next slide, please. Let's say a few words now about this grade 100 VLL. Grade 100 VLL essentially could be included in Defence Standard 91090 Issue 6. So such a proposal could be made. It offers the defence standard market a similar option to the US, should we wish to begin the transition away from a lead in avgas, so looking for that 20% reduction. The grade itself is based on ASTM and CRC research. We don't simply change grades within aviation. A lot of work goes on in the background to ensure the correct technical moves and choices are made to make sure these fuels are fit for purpose. One key aspect about any idea of moving to 100 VLL is to make sure that its supply can be assured for the piston engine market. These aircraft do perform important roles of training and research around the world and commercial roles as well. For example, carrying goods where other aircraft could not commercially viably operate. So critical to make important decisions here that we don't suggest a fuel grade to be mandated which cannot be made by the industry. So a little bit of groundwork to be done perhaps before such a proposal moves forward within the defence standard, but certainly worth considering. If we move to the final slide, please. That completes the update for Defence Standard 91090, piston engine fuel. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Alisdair. A great summary and obviously a fascinating subject and not easy. So I'm just waiting. Anybody who's got questions, please put your hand up and that. But just one question, which is the obvious one, Alisdair, which is presumably fairly tedious for you in a way. But what do you see as the timeline? I mean, it's the obvious thing, but, you know, people talk about 10 years, but, you know, they've been talking about 10 years for, you know, last 30 years. And do you have any particular insights yourself into that, what people might do? What's the industry going to do?
It's a good question, and I appreciate people's concerns over this because the industry carries a lot of commercial value within these aircraft, and it has always been an aspiration that any transition is going to be phased to minimise any commercial downside for the operators. So we should see the transition as being a staged approach in a logical fashion by the industry, and that is really, I guess, now being driven by the environmental report we've just seen and the PAFI programme. So I would expect in the next few years, certainly aircraft types to be having to meet that requirement of an unleaded compatible piston engine within the airframe. So something to look towards for the industry, and it's not impossible. You can develop a performance aviation engine to run on a mid-octane unleaded fuel in the first instance, and any benefits from a higher octane fuel is a positive upside for the industry. So staged approach is the way to go.
Right. Thank you, Alisdair. We have a question from France Chavin. If you could unmute your mic and ask the question, please.
Hello. Hello, I make a mistake. I have no question. Excuse me.
All right. Okay. I'm very sorry about that. It came up as though you had, so not to worry. If so, we haven't got any more questions on that. So you're released, Alisdair. Thank you very much for the update and a really nice clarification of the challenges facing that fuel. We'll move on now to looking at what's going on in the US, in particularly what's happening to the ASTM specification. And we're lucky enough to have George Wilson, who known to very many of you and very a long-standing expert in the field and very close to the ASTM. So what better person could we have to explain what's been going on recently? Over to you, George.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to be at this meeting. 2020 was the first time since 1983 I did not go to the United Kingdom, which was a shame because it's one of my favorite places. But anyway, next slide, Francisco. Y'all hear me? Hello?
George, the next slide's up there. You can...
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to cover D1655 changes, then some other subcommittee topics of impact specification interface between the ASTM Sub-J and UK MoD, and then what's up with the ASTM DO2 and DO2J meetings. Next slide, please. Next slide. There we go. Thanks. 1655 revisions. We've added D8305, the supercritical fluid chromatography for aromatics and naphthalenes, to Table 1, detailed requirements of aviation turbine fuels. This is the last act of the great aromatic crisis. This was a great effort between ASTM and EI and everybody involved to come up with solutions for when suddenly it was whoops apocalypse, we have no ready way to measure aromatics. Now there are 4 aromatics methods in the 1655, ASTM 1319, IP 156 FIA methods, which remain the referee in 1655. ASTM 6379, IP 436, the HPLC method. ASTM D8267, the UV-Vis GC method, and ASTM 8305, the supercritical fluid chromatography method. So next slide, please.
So George, just for information, the slide does switch over virtually when you say so.
Okay.
It may not pop up in yours straight away,
Yeah,
but you don't have to wait. We can also.
Thanks. 1655 revisions in process. We have a revision to the non-mandatory information for additives. Currently, the section discusses potential issue with process additives. The proposed revisions add cautions about recovery and crude oil transportation additives. We've seen, and I've worked with, issues that have been caused by recovery additives. One was an issue that caused corrosion issues that would make it fail the corrosion test. Revision wording, co-processing of Annex A1. Sorry, we're working on it again, so you'll have to revise yours again. So I'm sorry, but the pedants in the world want it very, very precise, and that's just kind of the way it is. So we're looking to add ASTM D7094 flashpoint test. We have a pending revision for the non-mandatory information related to drive cetane number to lean blowout issues. The National Jet Fuel Combustion Program has shown that when the cetane number gets low, that the lean blowout becomes much more of a potential. And when you're dealing with synthetic fuels, that becomes more of an issue than refined fuels, because refined fuels typically come in 35 to 50 max, but some of the synthetic fuels can go well below that, so that's going to be an issue. And then we have a pending subcommittee review of proposed editorial changes. Well, we're trying to update a bunch of 1655 to make it more readable and better, and also get rid of some of the deadwood in it that came from time immemorial. Next slide, please. Other subcommittee topics of note, we have a change in the subcommittee bylaws, single site reproducibility definition. We have quite a few tests that we own in Subcommittee J, gravimetric tests and water tests and things. That reproducibility was all done in one spot. Well, that kind of runs counter current to the thinking of the CF94, the precision people, but we point out that the interest in these tests is that they just can't be transported very well. And people want to know, if I have two water separometers in one spot, what's my likelihood of getting the same answer, or measure two sets of particle counting or something. So we wanted to have that done. So we've come to an agreement with the statistics people on a way to do it. And we're going to be changing all the new tests, and we're going to go back and change all the old tests to reflect the new wording that in our bylaws. In section 6 on alternative aviation turbine fuels, we have a new task force that's going to be led by Gerhan Andek of GE and Jim Kinder of Boeing on 100% SAF. This is opened at the request of the FAA OEM review panel, and it will evaluate paths to both a drop-in D7566 and a non-drop-in new standard 100% SAFs. I want to note that ASTM has no regulatory authority to enforce a move to sustainable aviation fuel. We act on technical requirements defined by users. We can respond to regulatory requirements, but in ASTM parlance, SAF would mean synthetic aviation fuel. And it's important because there'll be places in the world that you'll want them to have the same kind of, maybe the new drop-in synthetic fuel, but they will not be putting in, they won't be going to sustainable. But you want to be able to fly your planes there and get the same high quality fuel that we're looking at. Next slide, please. The ASTM D02 and D02J meetings, all the ASTM meetings this summer will be online via WebEx, okay? The Aviation Fuel Subcommittee meetings will be between 10th of June and 22 June 2021. The daily schedule will be similar to the last two meetings. The final schedule will be provided to subcommittee members. ASTM will send daily notices to Sub-J members. ASTM membership is not required to attend the meetings. A registration is required, and Vicki James has agreed to handle any assistance that anybody in the UK or Europe needs. Hopefully we'll be able to meet in person in Anaheim. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Hey, George, thank you very much. And really good. I'm looking to see if anyone's got any questions. There's a lot going on, and all that, and interesting comments about the looking at the 100% SAF spec. That when you look at how much SAF there is, then clearly that's an interesting play.
Well, it is. I mean, we've making pathways and making it possible, but it's going to take regulatory effort to bring it to fore. I mean, our interest is making sure airplanes fly, and unlike the other transportation fuels, where, well, if your lorry stops in the middle of nowhere, you're just on foot, or if your boat stops or something, we can't afford to have failures in aviation fuel. Okay. The last fuel-related failure that I know, fuel-related, not fuel contamination, not wrong fueling, but fuel-related issues that I recall were in the mid-'80s with the thermal stability in Brazil. Pretty much jet fuel, you can count on it as jet fuel. You may not be able to count on what people do to it, but you can count on it as a fuel itself, and we have to keep it that way.
Absolutely, absolutely, good point. So I can't see any questions, so I think you're probably off the hook, and okay. We're finishing. We're breaking early. We've got a break scheduled for George's thing, but we're running early, so we're running about, amazingly, probably unheard of in history. Not only, George, did you not come to the UK in 2020, but we're also running 20 minutes ahead of time in 2021. So a couple of unexpected things popping up. But anyway, let's have a break, and I think probably if we get back for 15:15 on London time, that would be great. That's in just 20 minutes. So should be time to get a cup of tea or something, and back. We'll start again at 15:15. Look forward to seeing you back here. Thanks very much, everybody. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the 2021 UK Aviation Fuels Committee meeting, bang on 3:15 here in London. In fact, I'm in my small wooden cabin out on the prairies of London, and it's dull and overcast, but we have two more presentations this afternoon, both fascinating in their own ways, and I think just illustrating the just how the spec gets involved in all sorts of dimensions of just the way aviation and commercial aviation in particular is organised and relies on fuel as obviously the energy source for all the wonderful stuff that aviation does. In particular, now we're going to have a look at the aspect of sustainable aviation fuels. It was mentioned earlier in terms of how Tina was incorporating it into the spec, and all the challenges of trying to make sure the spec is suitable for both new aircraft and all the legacy fleets and all that sort of stuff. But so there's a lot of detail in that spec. But obviously, sustainable aviation fuel is a multi-dimensional issue with not only the fuel, how you specify the fuel, but how you make it and how you supply it and how you enable it and facilitate the production of it, and of course how airlines in the end afford it in that sense. So we're lucky to have a perspective, a sort of a different perspective than what we'd probably normally hear in this meeting, but we're very lucky to get it because it's a UK perspective, a large market, and it's coming from Giorgio Parolini, who looks after the head of the advanced fuels bit of the Department for Transport in the UK, and he's going to cover sort of some of the thoughts that they've got in the government and how to motivate and how to get this thing going. So Giorgio, without further ado, I'll hand over to you and get going. And don't forget, everybody, put your hand up to ask a question, and we'll cover them at the end. So Giorgio, over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm Giorgio Parolini. I'm head of advanced fuels at the UK Department for Transport. The focus of my team is mostly sustainable aviation fuels. And as Mike said, indeed, I'm not a technical person. I know many of you come from a technical background, but actually my focus is mostly policy development and how government can support the supply and production of SAF. And indeed, I'm here today to talk about the wider vision for sustainable aviation fuels and aviation decarbonisation, and how we see the work that the government is doing in the upcoming months. So if we can move to the next slide. Very briefly to set the scene, transport, as many of you know, is the largest emitting sector in the UK. Aviation today accounts for a relatively small proportion of these emissions, but emissions over the past years have been increasing significantly, in particular on the international side, with emissions actually doubling from 1919 to 2019. So in particular, as we look to decarbonize the other modes of transport, roads in particular, which are probably a bit easier to decarbonize, the proportional contribution of aviation emissions is likely going to increase significantly. And this is why it is really important actually that we act quickly to put actually aviation on a more sustainable pathway. So moving to the next slide. Indeed, it is really important that we move towards a more sustainable pathway for aviation, not least because of the reduction in carbon emissions that can bring about, but also because of the significant environmental benefits that could bring, as well as the innovation and industrial opportunities that moving to a more sustainable aviation sector could bring. We shouldn't also forget about what is happening and the implications of COVID-19 and what that has meant for the aviation sector more in general, and why we continue to support industry throughout the pandemic. It is really important actually that we try to build back greener and better, and we use the implication of COVID as an opportunity to build back a stronger industry and the greener industry as well. So what does the UK government approach currently entail? It's a very mix of a combination of different levers and different policy we're trying to put in place. Definitely, given the global nature of the aviation environment, we continue to work internationally through ICAO to implement CORSIA. We're working to implement the UK emission trading system, which recently came into force. More in general, with COP26 coming up in November in Glasgow, we're really keen to capitalize on the opportunities and actually galvanize domestic and international action to decarbonize aviation. And in the upcoming months, we'll be looking to introduce some new initiatives which indeed go in this direction. We continue to support the wider basket of measures and technology with funding for sustainable aviation fuels, as well as zero-emission aircraft and associated infrastructure. We're working in terms of DFT, we're working closely with BASE and the Aerospace Technology Institute to support different projects that will look at innovative ways of actually decarbonizing our skies. I've highlighted here two areas in particular. One is the Jet Zero Council, and the other one is sustainable aviation fuels, because I'm going to spend a bit more time to talk about these now. So if we can actually move to the next slide, please. Yes, the Jet Zero Council probably lies at the heart of the government approach. It's a partnership between industry and government that brings together a very wide range of stakeholders from the aviation sector, ministers, CEOs, academias, and senior stakeholders to try actually to bring and deliver new technologies to the market and find innovative ways to decarbonize aviation and cut aviation emissions. The council in particular aims to overcome the barriers that industry face at the moment in achieving net zero aviation, and it will look at making the UK the best place in the world to develop new aviation technology. We had two meetings today. The latter was actually earlier this morning. So the council is chaired by the Transport Secretary alongside the Business Secretary, and we convened a successful meeting earlier in the day. If we move to the next slide. Yes, as I mentioned, it's very much, the idea is very much of a partnership. So this is the range of organizations we're engaging with through the Jet Zero Council, although we continue to engage with the wider industry, even with those who may not necessarily be represented at the council, to continue to understand how we can best support the aviation decarbonization agenda. Moving on to the next slide. I've listed here some of the priorities of the Jet Zero Council. In particular, ministers are really keen on decarbonizing long-haul passenger flights. There is some ambition for a zero-emission passenger flights across the Atlantic. So much of the work that the council is doing is to actually focus on developing and industrializing zero-emission aviation and aerospace technologies. But this is not the only thing which is happening. We're looking at different policy and regulatory levers and what the framework we need to put in place and deliver net zero aviation by 2050. And a very big part of the council is actually focusing on sustainable aviation fuel. So how can we work with industry to establish SAF production facilities in the UK, invest in new plants, and actually deliver carbon emission savings? Moving to the next slide. So this is why focusing on actually on these key priorities for the Jet Zero Council, we establish underneath the main forum some delivery groups, which will actually focus on a more narrow area of work. One in particular is sustainable aviation fuels, and the other one is zero emission aircraft. Starting actually from zero emission aircraft, that will focus indeed on how we can work to deliver new innovation to the market, building on the existing work that the ATI Aerospace Technology Institute and the Fly Zero initiative are already doing. And on the other side, sustainable aviation fuels, again, trying to establish UK production facilities. Underneath the sustainable aviation fuels SAF delivery group, we actually focus on 4 subgroups. One of which focuses on the mandate, one on technology, one on commercialization, and one on COP26. Starting from the mandate, actually, that will aim to support DFT in the development of a trajectory for sustainable aviation fuels uptake in the country. The technology work group will actually look at how we can, the sustainability criteria and how can we foster technology development in sustainable aviation fuels, what kind of innovation is needed, what's the potential of different technologies. The commercialization work stream focuses a bit more on the industrial opportunities and actually trying to understand how we can tackle market barriers and how we can build plants in the UK. And the COP26 work stream is focusing on actually trying to gauge the feasibility of supplying SAF for the event in Glasgow later this year. Next slide, please. So this is indeed actually linked up to this work. We're trying to gather evidence from the Jet Zero Council through the Jet Zero Council SAF delivery group to try to shape the wider policy package and our work on sustainable aviation fuel. So how we're approaching the task in DFT. There are 2 key priorities we're keen to focus on. The first one is definitely driving carbon emissions and reduction. So using SAF as a way to reduce the footprint of aviation. The other one is building a strong and world-leading domestic industry. These priorities were highlighted back in the Decarbonising Transport Setting the Challenge document, which we published in March last year. And since then, we actually work a lot to try to put some policy in place. We're building a strong team, and these commitments converge in the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, which many of you may have seen, released back in November by the Prime Minister, which actually includes some commitments on sustainable aviation fuels policy and funding as well. And I'll try to unpack a bit further these 2 pillars of our SAF vision now. So moving to the next slide, please. Driving carbon emissions reductions, as said, is one of the key priorities of our work. I'm sure many of you are already familiar and probably more expert than me in life cycle assessment and understanding the potential that sustainable aviation fuels actually have in decarbonizing aviation and the life cycle emissions that they can achieve. And what I put here are two graphs that shows somehow what the different expectations for SAF uptake in the UK currently are. And starting from the top with sustainable aviation, which sees potentially a 30% roughly uptake by 2050 and a 25% uptake by 2050 again, foreseen by the Committee on Climate Change in their latest report on Carbon Budget 6. Although one of the scenarios actually that the CCC provided consider up to 50% uptake of SAF by 2050. So overall, there is some perhaps maybe there's no clarity about what potentially the uptake could be, but we're really keen to understand this further. But overall, there seems to be some strong agreement within the industry that actually SAF will play a key role in decarbonizing aviation. And much of the work we will be doing at DFT will try to actually capitalize on this ambition and this expectation to understand a bit more what a feasible supply and the feasible uptake of SAF in the UK could look like. Moving to the next slide. I mentioned before building a strong SAF industry. So this is again one of the priorities of our work. Ministers are really keen to build new plants in the UK, create thousands of jobs in the country, and we're actually already seeing quite a few projects actually active, supported by some of our previous funding, Velocys and Lanzatech, 2 companies aiming to build plants in the UK, which are eligible for funding our under our Future Fuels for Flight and Freight competition, which opened in 2018. Fulcrum is one of the latest additions and one of the latest projects that actually announced a plant, I think, back in February in the UK. There are indeed different potential opportunities for SAF players and many other companies which are looking to invest in the country. And again, we're really keen to ensure this is possible and this is feasible. Where SAF plants could be located? This is a good question, and we're working with industry to understand a bit more where SAF plants actually make sense depending on local supply chains, availability of feedstocks, and some of this consideration. I put down here a map of what some of the expectations about potential future clusters of SAF production could be in the country. But definitely, it's not just the UK looking at SAF production more in general, and some other countries are thinking about supporting SAF, and we're seeing many projects being announced in the UK and abroad. So it is really important actually that if we want to build a strong domestic industry in the country, but actually globally, we support the sector in a way that fosters technology development and commercialization. So I'm going to explain this a bit more in detail in the next slide. Yes, this is just a recap of some of the market barriers that SAF plants are facing when trying to be scale up, and how the policy we're putting in place in the UK government aims to help. This is perhaps a quite simplistic way to explain, but I just put down some of the market barriers and some of the challenges, a bit of a chicken and egg problem. But starting from any point in the circle, you know, SAF, as many of you know, is incredibly expensive at the moment. So we're talking about 2, 3, potentially 5 or 7 times more, depending on the technology we use to produce SAF. So 5, 7 times more than kerosene. That basically means that there is limited demand. Of course, the wider economic viability of a SAF plant becomes a bit more difficult to reach. If you add in the technology risks that many of the projects face when actually scaling up from a small pilot or demonstration plant to a commercial facility, and the engineering challenges associated to build that industry, definitely that basically means that at the end, the investment appears particularly risky, and this is why SAF project may not necessarily go ahead. And in turn, if we don't build plans, SAF will not go down in terms of cost. So this is somehow a circle of causes and consequences that somehow do not necessarily foster SAF deployment. And we're really keen to try to help and support tackling these challenges to ensure that actually SAF can scale up, both on the supply side and on demand side as well. On the supply, I mentioned already the FOC, Future Fuels for Flight and Freight competition, which just opened today alongside the Jet Zero Council, the new £50 million competition, which was announced as part of the 10-point plan back in November. So that will provide grants to companies which will have to bid for funding for a share of the £50 million to actually progress through the early development of these commercial facilities. As I mentioned, we're working on the demand side as well. So we announced a consultation on a SAF domestic mandate, and potentially we're exploring how these could be linked to wider international discussions. But overall, there is much more we could possibly be doing. So some of the key things we're engaging with industry with at the moment are whether there could be some additional business models that could be put in place to support wider production. And we're working across government to try to ensure that we actually ease some of the barriers that SAF plants may face when trying to access government-backed capital, such as loan guarantees or something which would help provide the funding companies may need to scale up. So overall, this is a summary of the SAF policy we're trying to put in place. And I would certainly say watch this space as we continue to roll out measures and to develop policy at pace. If we can move to the final slide of my presentation, which is just a recap of the next steps and what we see coming. So definitely that consultation, the SAF blending mandate expected for summer. I mentioned many of the policy levers that we are actually exploring as part of the wider aviation decarbonisation agenda. These will converge in a new net zero aviation consultation, followed by a strategy later in the year. And throughout the year, we will continue to convene Jet Zero Council meetings, SAF delivery group meetings, and launch new initiatives, as mentioned before, in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow this year. So these are the next steps. I think the last slide just has some content details. If any of you want to follow up with questions. But other than that, I'm really happy to take any questions.
Okay, sorry about that, Giorgio. Very good, very interesting to see just how government addresses the issues, because they're certainly getting people to use it there's a lot of appetite amongst the airline industry. You often talk to fuel suppliers, and the first question they get asked by the airlines is how much SAF can you supply us? But that is still relatively low volumes, and that, so it's not going to make a big dent. But you talk about mandates, and I'm personally just of a personal interest in mandates, because it always strikes me that, you know, mandates in ground fuels like diesel and gasoline for cars and trucks are very easy in a way, because they're within national boundaries. But of course, aviation being international, there's always seemed to be a problem with trying to, you know, get a level playing field, or whatever you want to call it. And do you see any way of overcoming that really, without you know, all the airlines screaming that it's not fair? Because it does seem to be the best way to get adoption, and that's how it's happened in the automotive fuels world.
Yes, this is a very good question, Mike. So I'm trying to unpack some of the components. There is definitely, as we look into setting a mandate in the UK, we need to have a think about the implications that a mandate could have potentially on cost of ticket prices and flying more in general, and how passengers may respond to this cost. So this is definitely something which we are keen to understand a bit further as we move into setting out a consultation on a SAF blending mandate. I would say there are some strong, I would say the industry more in general responding very positively to the opportunities to actually use sustainable aviation fuels, including airlines. So there seems to be some optimism that that's the direction where we should be going. But definitely, again, there will be quite a few implications of a domestic mandate in terms of actually what the cost implications will be, what the feedstocks and the technology pathways that will be supported will have to be, how potentially a reward system will look like. We're starting from the RTFO in the UK that supports renewable supply of supply of renewable fuels. So that's somehow the starting point as we move into understanding a bit further how aviation fuels could be supported in the future. They are already rewarded under the RTFO, but that's an opt-in, so there is an opportunity, but it's not an obligation. When we move into setting an obligation, we need to understand whether this should be placed on fuel producers or actually airlines. So plenty of questions in there. In terms of the wider relationship between what the UK is doing and the international implications and the bigger picture, so the global market, this is definitely something we need to explore further. The EU is looking at introducing SAF mandates through the Refuel EU initiative. Many member states are actually trying to introduce themselves some of these measures. It's really important that we understand, again, the implications of a blending mandate in terms of carbon leakage, for example, making sure that it doesn't result in any sort of negative consequence, but also in terms of competitiveness of UK yabs and more in general promoting UK industry. So plenty of implications there. We currently monitor what is happening abroad, and we're really keen to capitalize on the opportunities there.
Good. Hey, thank you, Giorgio. I have a question from the floor. Gerhan Andak from GE. Please unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thank you for that presentation. That was really great, to see all that activity going on in the UK. So my question is a little bit similar to maybe what Mike talked about the mandates. Typically what we see is what I might call carrots and sticks, basically incentives and mandates, a bag of them. And what I saw from your presentation, unless I missed it, is some investment credits, which is great, absolutely great, and mandates, but maybe I missed the incentives portion of that. So I would like you to comment on that a little bit. And secondly, I think I saw in one of your charts at 2050, you have this goal of introducing about 25% of SAF or replacement of petroleum fuel by 25% SAF. That also seemed to me a little bit lower than what we typically see as a SAF replacement goal for 2050. So I would appreciate your comments on those two things.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll start from the last question, which is about the overall ambition and the potential targets. So the figures I present actually come from industry. So as a government, we don't have yet defined exactly what the uptake of SAF will look like. Definitely, we need to consider several factors when we decide what the demand ambition will be, and what kind of feedstocks we can access to, and what kind of how quickly plants can scale up, what the ambition and what the carbon savings we can achieve. Definitely, there needs to be, like, ambition is great, trying to come up with sensible targets is a bit more difficult in the long term, given some of the uncertainties and some of the technological and financial barriers that many plants face at the moment. But definitely, as we look at the longer term, we're really keen to somehow set a trajectory which is ambitious, but also feasible and potentially economic, using learning effect and these sort of things that may happen when we manage to build more and more plants. So nothing set in stone at the moment in terms of ambition. And again, very different views from industry on what that could look like. Someone is talking about 25%, someone is talking about 50%. There is a big expectation for power to liquid and how that technology in the future could scale up, potentially taking over much of the kerosene used today, but still something we need to assess when setting out that trajectory again. Hopefully the consultation which we will release in the upcoming months will try to provide some clarity on what our final proposal will look like, but at the moment it's mostly still engaging with industry to understand the different options. Picking up the first part of your question, which was about incentives. So as I mentioned, at the moment, SAF is already rewarded under the RTFO. That basically means that if you are a fuel producer and want to bring some SAF into the country and supply some SAF, you can claim some certificates that will contribute to your revenue. So there are already some incentives in that form. The two competitions I mentioned, so the Future Fuels for Flight and Freight provided 20 million of capital funding, and the new one we launched today provided 50 million through direct grants to companies. So companies will have to apply for funding and bid for funding to try to secure some of that. But definitely we're keen to support the industry in that sense and helping them making some pragmatic progress in the delivery at the early stage of this new SAF production facility. So there are some incentives there at the moment. And one of the things I mentioned, we're also trying to explore whether there is a need for additional incentives or for some other interventions from government that could help progress policy even further and actually develop SAF plants more quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Giorgio. Seeing no more questions, we'll say thank you very much, Giorgio. Very interesting perspective, and thanks. All good luck with the government policy. It's I can imagine it's a tricky business. Okay,
thank you.
We're going to move on now to the last presentation of the day. Last but not least, of course, and we've got really just another dimension of the complexity of the aviation industry and impact of the specification. So here we have Andreas Schmidt from Lufthansa from an operator's perspective, looking at biocides, and as Andreas explained, there's a big issue, as many of you know, about biocides approvals and suitability came up, and the timing was sort of perfect, just before airlines were going to park lots of aircraft up for a year or so, and just when you need them. So a lot of issues, a lot of disruption, and a lot of problems for the industry. And it's a fantastically interesting subject and story. So Andreas, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Andreas Schmidt from Lufthansa. I'm going to talk a little bit about the biocide issue, and the whole story started a couple of years ago, where we had this bottleneck of two contradicting developments, and effectively coming a little bit from the last presentation from the future of sustainable fuels to a very prominent and actual issue with biocides. I would like to start with the small agenda and 4 agenda items, which I identified on the next slide. This is, first of all, can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. First of all, I will give you a little bit of a wrap-up. So the status quo, when we talked about biocides and especially the usage of biocides in Europe before 2019. Then I would like to inform a little bit about the developments in 2019 and 2020, which caused at the end of the day a little bit of movement in these regards, and also a little bit of reference to the Biocide Task Force, which was formed early last year to more or less counterweight these developments and see how we can, as a joint industry effort, overcome these bottleneck situations, and also a little bit of outlook at the very last agenda item with the way forward. On the next slide, I quickly summarized what biocides are usually used and then who is the user of biocides usually in Europe. But typically, biocides are applied by the MROs, so the aircraft maintenance organizations. They handle these things, and usually they use kind of an interface together with the fuel providers. The fuel provider delivers fresh fuel, and the maintenance organizations puts the biocide on top of the fresh fuel into the tanks, and the biocide later on does its job in controlling or mitigating the microbiological growth. As the things stand in 2019, we had 2 approved additives, and these, of course, were also listed in the AMMs. A little bit of difference in handling-wise. We had a little bit of difference in the prerequisites when it comes to biocide application, soak times, etc. But at the end of the day, it was pretty easy, and we come to this later on. In Europe, we only had the allowance, the formal allowance, to use one of these 2 additives. In general, these biocides are used for 2 general items, and this is, first of all, the mitigation of actual MBG happening in the tank. So in case we have any indication confirmed by the microbiological growth tests, we usually apply biocides beforehand. It develops to a tremendous scenario where we actively need to enter the tank and clean the tank. So at a very early stage, we use biocides, or used biocides in the past, to mitigate the growth happening in the tank and preventing the tank entries effectively. And the other potential scenario, of course, is the aircraft parking and storage condition for a longer period of time, where we usually are facing the situation that we have a tank with, as per design, problematic designs, which makes it very difficult to get rid of all the water. So we can do the drain, of course, but there are various pockets, etc., and it's a bit problematic to really make sure that aircraft tanks, when the aircraft is stored with a certain amount of fuel for a longer period of time, and I'm talking about not weeks, but more about months or 6 months, even half a year or more. Usually it was definitely best practice to apply biocides as a preventative measure and make sure there is no microbiological growth happening. So as you can see on these 2 example pictures, potentially you can hardly see some small discolorations on the primer on the lower left-hand image, and on the right-hand image, I think it's very hard to identify any discoloration on the sealer or anything else which might be wrong in this tank. And I think one major aim with the airlines and also the MROs is, of course, to be sure that whenever a tank entry is indicated, we want to effectively have the necessity to do something in the tank. And so it's very unfavorable to open up the tank, vent the tank, have massive aircraft on ground situations, and at the end of the day, opening up a clean tank and close it as it is. So in these early indication, and I think I referred various times already to the MBG tests, which play a major role, they give us, or shall give us, the appropriate tool and the appropriate early indication. Oh, here's something developing, better to apply a biocide and control it at a very early stage. That's what we use biocides for. On the next slide, we see a little bit of overview how the market situation and also compliance-wise, we of course had these 2 Biocides here, BioBor-JF and Kathon FP1.5 were listed in ASTM. Table 2, where we can find the additives for aviation fuels. Of course, these two were allowed and also referenced in the list of consumable materials from the engine OEMs and also from the AMMs. Unfortunately, in Europe, there is a European biocide regulation in place, which allowed only the one product, Kathon FP1.5, to be introduced in the market and used by the airlines or maintenance organizations. So for our airline group, I can say that the biocide Kathon worked in real conditions pretty well. We had no adverse effects, but all this, of course, and I think it's very important to say that whenever it comes to biocides, the proper application is key. So it's not only health-wise a very problematic product. You need to make sure that it's properly applied with the correct dosage rate and proper mixing. But we come to this later on once again. On the next slide, I showed a little bit of scenario where we can see clearly when biocides are used, and also it shows what we want to prevent. So this is, if you so will, a little bit of worst case scenario embedded in a more generic flowchart here, starting with an annual MPG test, or as well with an MPG test after the storage or parking of a certain aircraft. So we apply this test, and in case the microbial test, this one is indicated by this very small magnifier in the yellow color here. When this test confirms we have a moderate or heavy contamination level, usually we apply a second test just to be sure that the resulting actions are really rectified, and that we make sure that these following actions are worth to be taken. In case the second test indicates the same or even higher contamination level, then usually we end up in the middle section of this flowchart here, indicated together with this little mechanic icon, where we go to the step 4. So this is effectively the biocide treatment task. And fortunately, so we're talking about several hours of ground time, not for the application as such, but most prominently for the soak time. The good thing is that the aircraft can go back into service without massive ground time, which would be necessary with a tank entry, when we effectively have to open up and vent a certain tank, and also the working hours. So clearly we want to end up in the red section here at the very right icon or arrow, where we have the tank entry and cleaning. And this one is triggered after retest. So after we apply a biocide, we send the aircraft back in the air and do a retest afterwards. And if this one is still confirming there's microbiological contamination present at the tank, then we have to open up the tank and do the physical cleaning. So that's in general the procedure. And just to let you know that this general procedure may vary from airline to airline. There are several who allow a second biocide treatment in this row, but just to let you know what we are definitely talking about when we're talking about biocide application, and where does this fit in the maintenance schedule. So just as an overview, and on the next page we can go forward with the next agenda item. Next page, please. Yeah, the developments in 2019, 2020 revealed on the next page several factors and technical findings, effectively safety issues. On the next page, please. We had in 2019 cases of biocide-caused incidents, which were documented, and these caused, at the end of the day, engine OEMs to remove the biocide Kathon from their list of approved additives. To make things a bit complicated, this decision has been made only by some of the engine OEMs, and some still allow the usage of Kathon. But on the other hand, more or less directly after this decision from this certain engine OEM to remove this product, the manufacturer stopped production and also refused to bring the product back into the market. So we had an accessibility issue, especially in the EU, where we had no formal allowance to use BioBoard.jf, but very high demand caused by the pandemic and the massive aircraft groundings. So good thing is there was a solution for this, but there were several effects where we had to adopt our procedures and make sure that no insufficient biocide handling took place. And I come to this in the next 2 slides. We can go to the next agenda item already. Thank you. So we established a biocide task force underneath the IATA Technical Review Group, and fortunately we had various experts from the biocide manufacturers to the microbiologists, which provide the test kits, all the way to the OEM and also participating airlines, to share the most prominent issues, lessons learned, and also share the information and make sure where the limiting factors are sitting and where we need to intervene and adopt the procedures, adopt the handling guidelines, etc. On the next slide, we can see. Next slide, please. Thank you. We can see that we had 3 major objectives. And of course, the most prominent one, we want to have proper aircraft storage, and we want to allow a safe restart and robust procedures for future operation, which is a bit tricky and difficult because it has been pretty clear before this removal of Cathon product in the EU. Usually the maintenance organization handled only 1 biocide, and if now 2 biocides are used, or also with a transition period, 2 biocides in the first place and afterwards another biocide, which needs to have other handling procedures to be followed, we need to adopt the additization cards, we need to adopt the procedures, etc., etc. So various items, and this working group is ongoing, so there's still work in progress. But the good thing is we already indicated some procedure alignments between the different OEMs. We had some good steps forward with regards to the information sharing, and also the Brexit effectively did not really help, as the formal allowance of a new biocide, naming BioBoard.jf in the EU, or now the European Union and the UK, needs to go in parallel. So the good news is that, for example, a UK operator does not necessarily need to have all these more than 20 individual EU states allowing a derogation for BioBoard.jf in case he wants to maintain his aircraft only in the UK. But he has to still contact his own authority, and for the BioBoard, for the product itself, they have to apply in 2 different authorities the full approval of this additive. On the next slide, we see for the maintenance organization, just as an example here from Lufthansa Technik information, a big step forward, of course, was the development of the new Energy Institute guidelines. So here we can see the 1566, which is the biocide instruction, or in general, it collects the design criteria and the handling instruction for proper biocide additization cards. And this one will be referenced in the different AMMs in the future. And we need to make sure that the maintenance organizations will be aligned with this standard, where we have a bit of paradigm change, because the maintenance organization usually are not as used to handle Energy Institute information. So there's a little bit of work to be done, and also, as I already said, covering the different handling instructions via dedicated information to the mechanics, and really make sure that the differences are clear to everybody, and to prevent any mixing or interchanging from one biocide to the other, which is very problematic. On the next page, I quickly summarized the procedure of approving the BioBoard derogation, and also renewing this this derogation. Unfortunately, there's a procedure to have a biocide formally allowed to be introduced to the market, and this is the derogation following the Article 55 of this European biocide regulation. Unfortunately, this one is time limited, so the airlines and the maintenance organizations, they have to renew and better to stop their stopwatches. Make sure that you have accessibility to this important maintenance tool, because unfortunately it's not possible to have a general derogation from top down, from the European level down, to be effective on all the individual countries. You need to go individual country by country, and the adjacent authority will decide for the first derogation, which lasts maximum 180 days, and afterwards we need to go for the second approval, which has to be okayed or approved by the European Commission for a period of 550 days. And this one has to be repetitively renewed until the full approval is reached. And unfortunately, we are talking here not about a few years. In the worst case, it might be a decade until the full approval is made. But I hope, as things stand, we have a well-known product. We have very good support from the manufacturer, and I hope that we can go by mid of the 2020, so 2024, 2025, for full approval of BioBor JF. And also, of course, within the working group, we are discussing the any alternative solution for BioBor, just to allow a second additive, second biocide to be fit for purpose, to be introduced into the market. On the next page, we come already to the last item, which is the way forward. I can go ahead. One slide, please. Thank you. So to summarize a bit, biocides are an important and necessary tool to control the risk of tank contamination and mitigate the existing microbiological growth in case there is any. We will have to wait some more years until this derogation process can be ended, and when we will have the full allowance, formal approval of the BioBor JF to be used in UK and also the rest of the European Union. Oh, excuse me, the European Union, talking about separate countries nowadays. At the end of the day, I already mentioned it. I'm very, very happy that we have very good support by the different stakeholders, and it's very much appreciated, talking not only for Lufthansa Group, but as well for the other airlines. I think we did pretty good steps forward, and at the end of the day, we're talking about a safety issue, prevent the microbiological contamination on the one hand, on the other hand, of course, prevent any safety issue evolving from the biocide application as such. So these are two very important things, and I'm very grateful with the work done in the working group so far, and also bilateral between the Lufthansa Group and the different stakeholders. Yeah, with this, I would like to thank you very much. We can go to the next slide, and I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you. Happy to receive any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas. That's a great, very comprehensive and fascinating story. It makes us realize just how complicated, in a way, even relatively straightforward things can get. And right across from whether it's trying to measure aromatics in jet fuel or sort out a suitable biocide, there is complexity in all the aspects of aviation because of the extra, obviously, demands for safety at all times. But it's a great story, and it's good that it's got as it were, a happy conclusion to it and a workaround. So that is, we've got to the end now of today's session this afternoon here in London. We're therefore going to close at any moment. If you've got any questions for Andreas? I mean, now's the time, but at the moment, I'm not seeing any hands up. But I think Francesca is going to check, and if anybody else wants to communicate with me, if they've got a question, please do. I think we need to just check that the question system. Still no hands up anyway, so that's fine. So in terms of moving on, we've had a good program this afternoon, and thank you very much. We've had over 120 people on the call, as it were. So that's a terrific turnout, and obviously it'd be great to see everybody in the flesh, as it were, next year. But we're going to do another day tomorrow, and we've got a great program again tomorrow, and in fact building on some of the test method issues, but also the sustainable fuel issues, which are obviously very topical. And you know, one of the things which is in the media all the time is how do countries come out of the pandemic, and what are their priorities. And so many times you see it's climate change and building green economies out of using it as a watershed to change the emphasis around investment and all the rest of it. So sustainable fuel for aviation is right up there, and can't be ignored, obviously, but also is attracting so much interest and commitment from different organisations. Anyway, so that I think you've heard enough.
Mike, it's Matt Fielder. Can you hear me?
I can now, yes.
Hello, sir. I'm just saying there is actually a question from Ashton Pete, who's had his hand up for a while following that last presentation. So I'm not sure why you can't see that. But and also I noticed that we can't actually do any chat, so we can't type questions to anybody. Is that a reason why?
It is, and that we'll try and fix that for tomorrow. Last, as you know, absolutely correct, very astute observation, Matt. Last October when we did it, there was an ability to, as it were, have chat in the background. The issue is between whether you logged in as an EI guest or whether you didn't. And if you logged in as an EI guest, then you get to see the chat. But if you log in as just a general guest, this is my understanding, I'm not a Teams expert, as you might imagine, it means that you can't see the chat and you can't join in the chat. So I think we're going to try and address it. Maybe Francesca can look at it. It's a sort of Teams technical problem. But you're right. So it's not as ideal as it could be and as convenient as it was in October. But thanks for flagging it, Matt.
All right, well, no worries. But like I say, you still got Ashton Pete, who has his hand raised.
So I'm going to ask Ashton Pete, please, could you unmute and ask your question? And sincere apologies for not seeing you. But
no problem, Mike. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, thank you. This is Ashton Pete from 1710 Naval Air Squadron, Ministry of Defence. I did have a question for Andreas about the biocides. I was having a look at this issue at the end of 2020, and my question is, have Kathon completely withdrawn from the market, or are they in the process of formulating a new product?
Well, thank you for the question. As far as I can see, the product manufactured from Dow Chemicals is completely removed from the market. There is another alternative product available in the US, but once again, as per the decisions by some engine OEMs, this one will not be allowed to be used on these types because of the ingredients, which at the end of the day caused these incidents. We have carrying materials which caused valve blockings, etc., etc. And I think we will have in the future a bit more information on this as far as it can be shared with the community. And just to give you my perspective, I learned that the Kathon product as such will be removed, and this will last forever.
Okay, and they aren't working on any alternative themselves as a company?
As far as I know, this is not the case.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ashton. That's good A good point, and it's a clear answer, Andreas. Thank you for that. If anybody, Matt, Matt Fielder, can you shout out if there's any more questions for me?
No, that was it. That was it, Mike. Sort of no one else.
Thank you very much. So at this point, we normally, if we're in real face to face, we would of course be going off to a cocktail reception in the hotel. Sorry, we can't do that. Last October, Martin kindly invited everybody round to his place afterwards, but I don't think he has this year. I think probably his wife got fed up with the washing up afterwards. So we're just going to have to, resort to our own amusements and look after ourselves. But we look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow at the same time, 2 o'clock, 2 through till 5. It's pretty good that we're finishing, 50 minutes early, unprecedented. So much about this year has been unprecedented, and last year for that matter. So another unprecedented aspect, finishing early. Brilliant. But as I said, just make sure you're back ready to start at 2. So join in a couple of times, a couple of minutes early. Good program tomorrow, and look forward to hearing you. And bring all your questions along. We look forward to them, because that really does make the meeting. I mean, more we get involvement from the ground, it's much better than just listening to people. I think that's what we want. And face to face, it's easier, of course, but we should be able to do it here. Okay, everybody, thanks very much, and enjoy your evening wherever you are and whatever you're doing. And look forward to talking to you tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock London time. Bye for now.